Hello, everyone. I'd like to keep the conversation moving for the next three panelists who come to us with a really broad range of perspectives on the question of impact. I'm Effie Kapsalis. I'm Chief of Content and Communication Strategy at the Smithsonian Institution Archives. I'd like to present one of our neighbors, Alan Newman. He is the Chief of the Division of Digital Media at the National Gallery of Art. This division includes digital imaging, the gallery's website at nga.gov, and audio and video preservation. Preservation, I'm sure. Newman and his staff developed images.nga.gov in 2012, an evolving self-service, free open access repository of more than 48,000 publication-quality, color-accurate digital images of the gallery's collections. Then we'll hear from Michael Weinberg, who is the general counsel at Shapeways, a 3D printing service company, where he also oversees strategic partnerships. He's the author of a number of white papers that examine the intersection of 3D printing and intellectual property law. Michael founded 3D DC, an annual 3D printing policy event in Washington, DC, which I hadn't heard of, so this is good. He is also the president of the board of the Open Source Hardware Association. And then finally, Corey Kilbane, who comes to us from Pennsylvania, where he is a teacher and director of the Idea Labs at William Penn Charter School, a Quaker school in Philadelphia. He is one of our consumers of our 3D materials, so he's going to share that perspective. There he teaches atoms and reactions, bits and bots, and service through design. Recent teaching projects include creating a light bright wall for pre-K students. I'd like to do that personally. Building an augmented reality watershed sandbox using 3D facial scans to produce Grecian theater masks, and integrating design thinking into cultural awareness training and community building. So I'd first like to welcome Alan to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane, for inviting me. Diane has done a lot for the gallery in recent years, conservation space, and also helping me with our open access policy. It was very exciting to hear Brian be a strong advocate for open access. So I've remixed two older talks that I gave, one at MCN 2009, when many of us were just trying to figure out what should our policies be with open access, and then in the V&A at the end of 2012. So we've launched our open access site, images.nga.gov, in 2012, and we've had 3.2 million downloads since. This is our mission statement. When we applied for our first grant to do rapid capture, the Crest Foundation said to us, we are going to give money for digitization in the future, and now and in the future, as long as you commit to making your work open and open access without restrictions. So that was exciting. And now many foundations have the same policy. So if you're looking for funding, you have to commit to that. Again, 2009, almost 10 years ago, we were looking at 4 different choices. Freely give away images of art in the public domain. That's what we are doing. That's what we chose. And then there were all these other ideas which seemed hard to justify and hard to manage. Give away content for any non-commercial use and reserve commercial uses. Permit free use based upon limitation of press run. You know, this was called a scholar's license for a while. And allow non-commercial requester to decide what they wish to pay. That's kind of like admission at the Met. We looked at different business plans. Here was one from the Powerhouse Museum. Just trying to stir the water a bit, and eventually they came on board as open access. Looked at music models. Radiohead, 7th album, released their music as a digital download, and customers could make whatever payment they wanted, and they had 1.2 million downloads. I'm sorry, I can't get my notes to show. Can someone tell me? Excuse me. Okay. Thanks. Thanks. Okay. So it's basically giving internet distribution to boost later retail sales, giving away or collect donations for in effect, electrons and inject excitement into the purchase of atoms. Each product kind of feeds demand for the other. And some people said this was a fad, but if it's a fad, the Grateful Dead have been doing this for 25 years. So publishing model, I think the one I was most sympathetic to at the time was Cory Doctorow, who basically said, once it's in the world, it's going to be copied. So I'm going to give away all my digital copies. And he found that by doing that, he actually sold more books. Pay what you can, possibly. The most succinct statement was by Mark Jones, who was head of the V&A at the time, who said, the people paid for this once, why should they pay again? Powerhouse, and this quoted by Lauren Guttenplan, who's in our audience, experimenting with an open access initiative and eventually adopting it. Public policy, Hillary Balan and Marriott Westerman doing a very important paper at Mellon Foundation, basically saying this has got to stop. The prices were going up that people were charging for public domain images, and you must make it easy to order the images, and also the costs should go down or not be there at all for public domain images. And Ken Hammer, we've had a few real radicals for our system, and nothing changes without radicals. Basically saying, if you want to operate as a public charity, you're receiving a tax benefit, and these collections are now in the public domain. The assertion of copyright for visual surrogates is not a legal decision, so don't start with your lawyers, but a business decision which has become a monopoly. So that's one important paper he did when he was the head of digital policy at the Getty Trust, and you'll find some other great paper. His key paper is called Public Domain Art in an Age of Easier Mechanical Reproducing, and you can get it on DLib. This is my bibliography. I'm going to put this up somewhere, or maybe we can at the Smithsonian. Okay, so it'll be here, and you can get this. And this is 6 months after we went live. Very simple. Universal goodwill everywhere. That's internally and externally. Because we used to charge people for making prints and doing other things. So free outside, free inside. We still charge outside for doing extraordinary work that's going to take staff time, but we don't really we don't even charge for new photography if the client can wait. So we didn't lose revenue. We reduced staff by 3 people, 1 retirement we didn't replace, and the other 2 who were acting as administrators of this apparatus to take care of orders, we moved into our dam, which is the most transformational piece of our new dam of what we're going to be doing in the future. I also wanted to say that we've talked so far about open access to images, and it's also important to have open access to data, in particular collection metadata on GitHub or some similar repository. And we're in the process of doing that. So this is just a little more about NGA images. Want to modernize the process, facilitate greater access, reach the broadest audiences. This is what it looked like when we launched. It looks a little different now. Our director had something very nice to say about doing this and supported us from the beginning. How it's important for every sector we hit: research, teaching, personal enrichment. This is what we say on the front page. Free of charge, no strings, you don't have to contact us, just do with what you want. Now we're in the middle of planning a digital strategy with Simon Tanner, who did the Tates and helped Europeana with theirs, and it's just fabulous to work with. And we're going to see about feedback loop and study and what has. So I don't have the data on that, but we'll be doing that in the future to gather more of that information. Our effort was mostly to open it up and make it easy. You just go there, download, and here's what made the argument for us. We have the only Leonardo da Vinci painting in this hemisphere, Ginevra da Vinci. And this is the Google Images search at the time we were closed. Every possible conceivable way that you can distort the image is on the first 3 pages. And when you do open, and this was the Bridgman Gallery's version of our painting that they were selling at a very high price. And it actually looks like this. And we just did some great work, including photogrammetry and all kinds of good new stuff on it. We'll eventually catch up to you folks here, but it's going to take a couple of years and some really good planning. But we stick our toe in the water of 3D every now and then and have partnered with Facta Marte. You've had them here a while ago. Selected comments, that's the one we heard most. Or that's the one we received. So there's nothing to worry about when you do this. Generally, if you reassign your staff, you probably are not going to lose revenue for opening because you can still do the same things you're doing in manufacturing in your shop. So just providing images to the general public. And you'll probably find that if someone has a great business idea, they'll come to you because they'll want your imprimatur, and you'll be able to partner with them. So here's a nice thing that Angela Rudenstein had to say about us. I'm trying to stay under 10 minutes, so I'm not reading everything. And Max Marmer, basically saying, get rid of the boundaries between non-commercial use and commercial use. So that does wind up hurting you in the end, I think. Here's, last year we made things a little easier. Download direct to PowerPoint, no registration required for 4K by 4K. We also give free, we do ultra resolution work, and we give that generally free to people if on request. And that's about it. I hope I made it under 10 minutes. I did, okay. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Hey everyone, I am Michael Weinberg. I am from Shapeways, and I was really excited to hear on the earlier panel where people were talking about we need some stories, we need some examples, and so I'm here to tell you a story with an example of what happens when we brought together sort of a search for openness in the Open Glam community and some of the things that we at Shapeways were doing with our community. And so we designed what I'm going to tell you as a pilot program, but we designed it as a pilot program that we think can be expanded. And so I will be just nakedly upfront with you and say that one of the reasons I'm here is I'm looking for other people who are interested in doing something like this because we thought it was pretty neat and we'd like to do more of it. But let me give you some quick background to understand what this program is. Let me give you, since I'm assuming all of you are familiar with the concept of a museum, I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about what Shapeways is to understand what happens when they come together. So we are a 3D printing company. We don't make 3D printers. Instead, we have a website and we have a factory full of industrial 3D printers. And so we print in things like metal, in porcelain, in very high detail plastic, and people interact with us in one of two ways. One is if they have designed something and they want it printed on a printer that costs $1 million, they upload it to us, we print it for them, and we send it to them. And then probably more importantly for this conversation, the other way that people interact with us is they open up a shop. So they've designed something, they open a shop, and they put the item up online, and if a customer comes along to buy it, we'll print it on demand, there's no inventory, we'll send it to the customer, and then the designer will take a markup based on the sale. And so what that means is that we have this website, and we have these giant 3D printers, and we also have a number of sets of communities who've grown up around specific interests. And one of those communities is our jewelry design community. Jewelry designers really like the idea of being able to design 10 rings, throw them up online, and if one of them sells 5, then great, they sell 5 and they have none in their garage. And if one of them sells 5,000, that's also a great outcome for them. But as a company, we have a really deep background in openness. Our founder came out of the open software community. I do a lot of work in openness. If you want to talk about open licensing later on, come find me. And so we were saying to ourselves, what can we do that can really help power openness and openness in institutions and openness in GLAM? We have this platform, we have this capability. What can we do to help people who are making arguments within museums and other institutions about how important openness is, to empower them to make it easier for them to make that argument? And so we started asking around, we started asking our friends, and we got connected with, in this case, the team at the National Gallery of Denmark, SMK, and they're real leaders. I'm sure many of you know that team. They're real leaders in openness and real leaders in thinking about what it means to make their collection not only available digitally, which is an important step, but also thinking through the licensing ramifications so people can actually do things with their collection when it's available online. And so we came together and we said, okay, one way that we can do this is certainly to the extent they have 3D scans of objects in their collection, it's very easy for them to put them up online and sell them and make them available to people. That's fine, that's all well and good. But we thought we could do something more than that. And what we ended up doing is coming together and doing a design contest to bring the open collection of SMK together with, in this case, our jewelry design community. And so what we did is we had the curators at SMK select 6 works that were in their collection. Now, these are all 2-dimensional works. This is a 3D printing story, but it doesn't involve 3D scans of work in the museum. These were two-dimensional works, and also they're works that are in the public domain, which made the licensing questions very straightforward and very easy. So we had the curators select 6 works, and in addition to selecting the works, we had the curators write some background information because it was important for us to have the designers not just see the works, but also understand the context, to really be able to think critically and engage directly with those works. And we said, okay, we're going to have a design contest, and we have sort of one prize, but really there were 3 kinds of prizes. The first prize was for 1 winner and 4 runners-up. Those pieces we would print, we would manufacture, and those pieces are going to be displayed in the museum itself. So I'm actually headed to Copenhagen next week for our kickoff event where we're going to bring all of this together. But it was an opportunity for the designers not only to engage with SMK's collection, but then become part of the museum as part of a display. And so you could go to the museum and you could say, here's this work of art that's been in the collection for a number of years, that's hundreds of years old. And here's a new piece that has been made and inspired and is in dialogue with that piece from the collection. In addition to that, as the sort of primary outcome of the contest, we also said what we would do is we would pull together, SMK has created an online shop on Shapeways. And so what that means is, in addition to the 5 pieces that were the winners, another set of collection of pieces will be brought together as part of an online shop that's curated by SMK. And when those pieces are sold, the designer gets a fee, and SMK gets a fee. And so by being able to curate that collection and publicize that collection, SMK has a way to bring in revenue related to these new pieces that are inspired by its collection. And then finally, because the website is all print on demand, and so you can be over-inclusive when you include all the works that are part of that site, the museum also has the opportunity to have an in-museum shop, and they can take the data from what is selling on the website and use that to fill the collection in the museum shop to make those things available. So we have artistic conversations, and then we also have this retail opportunity all brought together with the open collection that SMK makes available. Now, we put this together. We thought it was really neat. We were excited about it. We didn't really know what people were going to do. We didn't have a lot of examples of this from the past. Some of the paintings do have jewelry in them. And so we thought, okay, well, maybe at a minimum, people will take those pieces out of the paintings, make 3D versions of them, and so earrings that haven't existed for hundreds of years or maybe never existed will be available. And that'll be pretty cool, but then who knows what else is going to happen. And what we found is that we got an incredibly broad and engaged response. So we got between 250 and 300, I think it's about 270 entries from designers all over the world. And they involved all sorts of works that sometimes were literal elements from the paintings, sometimes were much more inspired by what was available. And we had people who were designing in gold, who were designing in nylon. We just got this incredibly broad level of engagement. And actually, you could actually stop listening to me right now. If you just Google Shapeways SMK, you can see all of the pieces. That's going to be more interesting than what I'm talking about. I know that's a bad thing for a speaker to say, but we're friends here. That's true. So we had this incredibly broad collection of things. And then with the winners, we went well beyond just finding pieces from the painting. So this is actually the winner. Hopefully you can see this pretty well. So the team, who was the winning designers, actually plucked a couple of different elements out of the painting and then integrated it into a newly designed necklace. And as part of that, they described what they were doing, how they were seeing, how they were thinking about it. Our 4 runners-up did a very similar thing where, to various degrees, sometimes they took literal elements out of the pieces, and sometimes they took them merely as a motif, as a jumping-off point, to rework them into something that is clearly connected to the original pieces, but is not a literal copy of what's happening in the original pieces. We also found out that there are very strong differences between the design aesthetic of the Danish judges and the American judges. And so we had to build a process to work through that. And so, but I think one point to take away from this, and I know that a lot of times in conversations, when we're talking about openness, there is a tension between openness and revenue, and every step towards openness is a step away from revenue. Every step towards revenue is away from openness. And I think that one of the things that we learned in this pilot is that, in fact, openness fuels revenue. The only reason that this partnership works is because SMK made their collection so open. They made it open, they licensed it in an open way, and they invited that community in to create new things. And so now the biggest question that we get from our community is, when is the next one? I hope that there's someone here, there are many someones here who might be interested in doing something similar. And this is what I look like. So if you'd like to be engaged, please let me know, and we can talk later. Thank you.
So I'm from education, so I'll definitely not be talking about revenue. So what I really want to get into today is just about what happens when we really start engaging with ideas. And so tell you a little bit about myself. So I was a chemist, switched over to teaching, but I'm really excited now. I spend most of my time working with teachers from pre-K through 12 to really figure out, like, what are the tools you need? What do you need to make your best lesson? And so just really opening that question. And so I want to take a deep dive into something that we're going on right now with our lower school students. And of course, that starts with nuclear war. So in this, which is hopefully hypothetical, so we're getting into this really great book. It's a Hugo Award-winning novel about Candle for Leibowitz. And it's about, in the 1960s, seeing what would happen after the nuclear apocalypse and how this really big question of cyclical nature of history really unfolds, and really exploring how the survivors would come back and how they'd create a new world based upon the information they found from the old world, and eventually how that sort of repeats that process. Maybe not the most optimistic book, definitely not one we're getting into with third graders, but it brings us to some really real questions. So in 2004, they were working in a government site, and they found this bottle filled with a white, thick liquid. Ended up having to do some nuclear archaeology, and they figured out that it was actually plutonium from the Manhattan Project that had just been buried in the ground. Luckily, it's an alpha emitter, which means that it's not super dangerous, but it still raises the question about when we think about how do we communicate from the present into the future, because this one was definitely not labeled appropriately, definitely not the right signs on it. So it brings one really big interesting question for me is this idea of, if you've heard of it, Yucca Mountain, which is still hypothetical. It's in the process of being built where they're looking to put America's nuclear waste. And what was really interesting, and this comes back, I think hits on this idea of design competitions, is that in 2006, the Desert Space Foundation founded a competition to say, how do we actually label this space that's going to be able to communicate the 30,000 years that's still going to be radioactive? And so tying back, like looking into this, there was a really great, it was, I guess, early in the internet, so like not necessarily as many beautiful things up there yet. I think the winner was the yucca plant here, which would turn blue with radiation. So theoretically, it would then go back to being normal once it was safe again. Not actually made, but with CRISPR, anything is possible. But for me, it's thinking about some of our biggest stories that come from history and how do we incorporate that with students to really help them see those connections. So it's not just about studying a piece or learning about ancient China. How do we connect this to important problems today? And so that really took us to talking about the cosmic Buddha. Now, like, I have to give a big shout out to Keith Wilson helping out with this, been able to have lots of great conversations. But in there, it's the idea of around 600 AD, you had these Buddhists who were worried that Buddhism was going to disappear for another 1,000 years. And so how do they communicate the stories of Buddhism to the future so that people can then carry that idea forward? And so with the access to such great resources with a 3D, this allows us to really do a deep dive into this piece where we can have our students research the stories, learn about ancient China, and really get into these really big topics of history about how do we repeat ourselves, how do we communicate across time and cultures. And so what we turn this into now, and so this is one of our drone shots from just about a week ago, or I guess a couple weeks ago. We have this building that's going to be torn down across the street from our school. And so what we tried to do is made our own cosmic Buddha. Now, being a Quaker school, we have the Quaker tenets of simplicity and community and such. And so we actually have our lower school students are now trying to figure out how do you communicate these ideas through images and try to think about what is cross-cultural, how could we learn from our confusion and really interest in the cosmic Buddha. There's certain aspects of it we still don't totally understand. So how do we take those ideas and really put them to work with our students to say, if you're holding up a square, no one's 1,000 years is going to know that that's a cell phone. They'll just be like, what's that square in their hand? And going back and thinking about what that is. And so really trying to look at that. So really what I want to put out there today is that is something that we did with one resource. And so really trying to say we need good selections. In the end, our high school teachers didn't end up using the cosmic Buddha too much because it fit in this weird part in Chinese history that didn't fit our curriculum. But the idea is that if we had the entire Freer Sackler, they'd be able to find those stories and be able to build them into these narratives that are both meaningful, but also are those themes that come back and back and back to everything we do. And so I've definitely looked into whether or not we can 3D scan it ourselves. So like, this is one from the National Gallery that I did one day while I was over there. And so, but there's a lot of interesting questions to be done for like community 3D scanning. So I got hooked up with the University of Pennsylvania Intellectual Property Law Clinic to see whether or not we could start a site for teachers to be able to share models with other teachers. But in the end, the intellectual property, like whether or not something posts on there, whether we can access it, I think in the end they recommended that I could start the site, but I could never look at the site. Because if someone posted something that was copyrighted and I saw it, mean that I might be personally liable for damages for that piece being on there. So I think that's what's really important for being museums or having these access. So maybe you can invite people in to 3D scan, to be involved, to help you develop, to crowdsource, to be involved. Maybe you do have the money to go out there and do the super high-tech laser scanning and being able to take out the Apollo 11 capsule. But there are a lot of options out there, and there are a lot of teachers waiting to be engaged. And so I think what, to me, really struck me this year, getting into this, is this golden record. Does anyone know which? Awesome. But for us, this actually record is now outside of our solar system. Over in the last year, they waited for this change in noise coming back from there to see it. And so thinking about this is now on its way somewhere else, and this is probably the most in-depth approach that we've ever tried to learn how to communicate with someone that we could never speak to. And so I hope you guys will help us teach these kids how to be involved and let them explore these ideas in the same way.
Don't forget to tweet out any questions to SIDigiQA. Is that right? Okay. And it occurred to me this was such a wide range of panelists that I was trying to make sense of how they all fit together. And it came together as you were talking, luckily, just now. But it's really looking at the range from how do you take this openness initiative, what are kind of the nuts and bolts of that, through sustainability of the organization, so thinking about revenues and ways to further the mission of the organization with revenue, all the way to consumers, an important mission-related consumer education audience. So I'd like to start with, just since we left off with Corey, how do we create win-wins with educators and students that not only serve our mission, but also help us do what we do, but also further what you're trying to do as an educator?
I think one of the best things here is that, like, having spent a little bit of time over at the Museum of American History and working with Smithsonian, it's a really interesting thing when we get to the idea of artifact-oriented education, because when you're in a museum, you only have maybe minutes with students to be able to work with them. Maybe you have an afternoon to work with them in the piece. But in the classroom, we might have an entire semester, but we don't have access to these things. So having the ability to do this really allows interesting combinations. So imagine if you're a museum educator that you would get to spend 8 weeks with something. Or imagine if you're a teacher, you'd be able to have those real resources in there. So that idea of being able to put them out there really allows, just like, even if they're not as well marked up or having all of Keith's like great documentation on there, it allows them to sort of engage in different ways. And so whether or not museum educators and teachers could then share that bigger overlap, because now they both have access, because it does become tangible to them, could be a really like awesome way that this could go.
Can I add that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a very large and robust museum education program. And we also have, if you go on to images.nga.gov, you'll see that there are a lot of tools that help facilitate education. And one of the most interesting tools is that the teacher can set up a collection of whatever she or he wants to do in terms of having a program for the class. So whether it's self-portraits or American history, and there's no limit to how much you can save. And then she can then say to the students, download these 25 images, and then we'll talk about them in the next class. Or here's Monday's lecture, here's Tuesday's lecture, here's Wednesday's lecture. So we've had a lot of good feedback from its use in the schools. And hope to build other things onto it as well.
And Corey, just to tie this back a little bit to the students, how do they navigate the world of cultural heritage and copyright?
I don't think many of them ever think about copyright. Like, it's really interesting, like, even just discussions of, like, who you can take pictures of and when. Like, I've had a lot of interesting discussions with some of my high school students about, like, maybe you should ask their permission first before you post pictures of them online. And, like, among their friend groups, this is just very typical. They just generally consent in a lot of ways, and consent is just a much larger discussion among schools now, too. But it's just the idea of, like, how do you communicate with people, get involved, and talk about them. But for them, like, I mean, I think there's an interesting change from, like, when I was working in college, people asked me to install Napster on their computers as soon as they showed up. Didn't do it. But the idea of now, like, we're sort of moved beyond that, the idea of, like, they all have Spotify, or they all have things where there's a different licensure agreements. So sort of how can we kind of engage in that world to sort of adapt to the consumer as opposed to trying to be really rigid on that. And I think that's what a lot of potential here for these open resources allows them to get involved, allows them to see them, but also then helping them to build those connections with their personal lives so they can really love art, they can really love history and see how it connects in. I think is really that next stage. Like, how do we, and I know there's a lot of great museum educators out there and museum digital communicators, but how do we help them get the connection to the art in a way, like, so using Instagram, if you, is someplace that they often go in. It's really interesting. They even have fake accounts on Instagram that they present themselves in a way, but it's a really interesting identity exploration. So, like, it might seem silly at first, but they're crafting their own identities. How can we tie these in? How can they help understand what's going on and sort of communicate on those same platforms, which may or may not exist in 2 years or might be updated to the newest snap or whatnot, is still gonna be like a dynamic target.
Did you ever read?
Yeah, I have a follow-up to that. For many years, the gallery and other museums have prohibited photography in temporary exhibitions. And 3 years ago, we decided we weren't going to do that. And we'll tell our lenders that we're not going to do that anymore. And if anyone objects, we'll put a little sign up, don't take a picture of this one. And we've had very little of those kinds of objections, and gazillions of selfies in front of this painting and that painting, and it in a way it brings the exhibition into friends and family in a more intimate way than it ever has before. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something we've observed at the Smithsonian, especially with the Renwick Gallery, doing some of their larger installations, and that really become the visitor is part of the exhibit in a lot of ways. It's a richer engagement. So Alan, I wanted to ask about the last, how many years? 5 years that you've been open?
5.5 years.
5.5 years. Yeah. And if you were to do it again today, would there be any things that you would do differently?
No, it's always, you know, we're on version 3 now, and we can always add on and change and add to. So I think it was well received from the moment we did it, and it was the right time. You know, but, I can't think of anything I would do differently. No. Okay. Except maybe do it earlier.
So, Michael, I noticed on Twitter a point that you made really resonated with people, and that openness drives revenue. There's, you know, of course, the fear about losing revenue, but there is the landmark Simon Tanner study that looks at the fact that we aren't really generating a lot of revenue from rights and reproduction activities. Have you seen other examples of ways that openness have facilitated good things, not just revenue.
I mean, I read a fantastic white paper with interviews that talked about how that works, that you wrote. No, I mean, I think that it's a process where, in some ways, it's easy to, the mental model is easy where you say, okay, I know that there's an office somewhere in our institution where we're making money licensing. And so when someone comes in and says, we should stop licensing, then that must have a negative impact on that office and that revenue. But I think talking to more and more people in the museum world, there's this sense that the way that you measure impact, the way that you measure what you're doing is first of all much broader than the revenue of the licensing office. Is second of all, that revenue from the licensing office has, you should interrogate it a little bit, not because the numbers are not real, but because there are all sorts of process costs involved that, when you think critically about it, is what's happening. But I think, even these are just really great examples. If you allow people to take pictures of things inside your museum, it turns out they take pictures and they send them out to their friends. And at a minimum, that means that all of their friends are seeing what's in the museum, seeing what's in the collection. That's fantastic. The next step, well, maybe they want to come and see it too, because there's no substitute for, in the opening remarks. Even if you have a digital version, you want to see the real thing. I work at a 3D printing company. I can get 3D printed replicas of all sorts of things, but I still want to go to that place and see it. And so it's really important when you're thinking about opening things up to think broadly about the value of opening things up. And it's so easy to dismiss some of those things as hard to measure. It's hard to measure awareness. It's hard to measure these things. But they're really important, and they're really core to the mission and the values of these organizations. And so taking the time to understand all those impacts, it's a little bit harder than not doing it, but it can end up being really valuable in the long term.
And follow up to that, what can we learn? So you're involved in the open hardware movement, and there's obviously different models in industry around openness. What can we learn as nonprofits and government organizations from you?
I think that there are lessons about the hunger for engagement and the hunger to want to be part of a community. Openness creates communities, not automatically. You have to put work into cultivating it, but those communities are real and they're really engaged. And I think that one of the weird things about open hardware, and I think this is relevant when you're thinking about digitization and reproduction, physical reproduction, is that when you're reproducing physical things, there's an understanding, to kind of go back to the revenue point, there's an understanding that there are costs involved. And so even very strident openness advocates, and I think I am one, I work with a lot of them, understand that when you're talking about physical items, openness and costs and payment are not in direct conflict with each other. And it's okay to have an open program that also has revenue attached. It doesn't undermine what's going on. And there's a long conversation around that, around software, around purely digital goods. But in the physical world, there's an understanding that those two things can be deeply complementary, and in fact should be deeply complementary. And so it's an opportunity to engage with what it means to have an openness program while still making those things available. And I think there's a willingness among users to come to the museums as the place that have the canonical digital versions of these items, even if there are many other places to find them online.
Yeah, so museums are about authenticity, obviously, and there's no substitute for what's authentic. But then we have reproductions. And if we're going to, what we do to help people who are interested in reproducing is we have a color scientist on our staff. So he's developed a workflow that gets downloaded with all of our publication quality images that helps the user make a better reproduction of what we have to offer. And the bad examples I showed you of Geneva 5.5 years ago, since we've gone open, Most of them have been flushed out of the system, or they appear lower in Google searches. So,
Got that .gov and .edu working for us on the internet. So how can we better serve students and you?
I mean, it's multiple levels. I mean, it's the same thing like you talked about with Wikipedia. There are a handful of people that do the majority of the work, and you just sort of tear down, and that there's going to be you can find a bunch of teachers that are willing to jump out there and try new things. Then there's going to be the next set that are like, if you put something out there, they're going to find it and do it themselves. But there's always going to be that set where like, I mean, it's a busy thing, so taking on a new project, but just figuring out how, in a lot of industries, to engage those teachers who are willing to spread the word, who are willing to break down the barrier for the next set of teachers to be able to do that through there. So engaging on social media, trying to look for where you can do, I mean, getting onto Pinterest, getting onto places that they communicate, and really allowing them to share that information down. So regardless of whether it's a physical or just a pure digital item, really looking at how to engage on those platforms allows that information to spread, because often that's just the toughest thing. It's like there are many great museums and many great things. I know I'm forgetting the name of it in South Dakota, which has all the paleontology exhibits that have been 3D scanned. But like having someone going out to find that place to engage with them is really that biggest step. So being where you're at, making awareness known on it is going to be the biggest connection to get you into classrooms and to get us, like more and more people, to access these great resources.
So I think at this point, I'd love to hear some of the questions from the audience, and if there are any online, there is a Twitter question. Let's hear it.
A Twitter question sign. Look at that.
Should throw a bird.
Am I coming through? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Sarah Stauderman on Twitter says, everyone wants more content, especially for commercial use. What if museums don't hold the copyright for the majority of their works, like the Hirshhorn?
Well, I'll let Alan answer that.
if we don't hold the copyright, then we have to work with the copyright holder. You have to pay a fee to use it.
I think there's a big misconception with open programs that you open everything, and that's just not the case. In the study that Michael so generously cited, I looked at 12 institutions worldwide, and all of them chose a slice of their collection. So it's not going to go against copyright laws that are in place.
I have to say, I was in the earlier presentation, Cosmo Wenman was mentioned, who's an artist who does a lot of 3D scanning of antiquity, of old sculptures. And one of the points that he likes to make is that when you think about audio, sound, an audio recording that's 50 or 70 or 80 years old, or goes back to the beginning of sound recording, sounds very different than modern sound recording. And if you watch a movie that is 80 or 100 years old, it feels very different from a modern movie, right? There's a space there. But if you're looking at sculpture from 4,000 years ago, there's an immediacy to it. Or even painting from 400 years ago, there's an immediacy to it. So while there's definitely parts of collections that are still protected by copyright, there are these huge chunks of collections that are no longer encumbered by copyright, or were never encumbered by copyright, that were really meaningful for engagement and that can really have people create new and truly interesting things that feel immediate to them. And so the fact that you can't make all your collection open shouldn't mean that you shouldn't think about making huge pieces of your collection open.
I mean, I think thinking about the SMK work, I mean, it might just be new options. So depending on what you're at, there might be a way to gauge, just as they gauge the jewelry. I mean, imagine getting a major artist, like thinking almost going back to the Warhol work that he did. Like you have the ability now to thinking about Ai Weiwei, like the pot that was destroyed in the exhibit, like you can literally sell pots that people could drop and do that. I mean, there might be interesting ways to engage. Many artists might not, but some artists might be interested because of all the new options to recreate your work digitally and physically. There might just be new explorations.
Okay. No in real life questions, so we'll just go to Twitter. We have, let's take one from the audience.
Sorry, Twitter.
Do I have to stand up? He said either way, so I'm not going to stand. I'm just curious about sort of the funding of some of these projects. If we're expanding the use of these resources in education and schools, if there's a way to allow funding to sort of flow both directions, so both from museum donors to allow resources to go towards education, and for parents and students and school boards to allow funding to go the other direction.
So I think, fundraising is always an interesting thing. My school has a campaign event on Friday where we're doing lots of stuff and providing artwork. But I think that's a really interesting discussion. I don't know as much about the background in museum funding, but I think there's definitely ways to engage about what parts can be funded from what sides. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a necessarily combined effort, but I think there's different strengths on there. Like, you could talk about a lot of logistics from schools. Like, we're pretty good at moving lots of kids around and having them not get harmed. Like, but I think on the other words, there might be good ways that we can pair with museums and sort of get an idea. And if there's a great model out there, I'd love to see it, because we can get in there for trips are really well understood, but the idea of like, how do you take it to that next level and talk about resources could be a really interesting aspect. And I think there might be there might be a lot of flexibility with donors to be able to convince them, as this is a way that you can also have just that further outreach. But I think that'd be an interesting idea for a model.
Many of our education programs are funded by donors. For example, we're planning a MOOC now, and Smithsonian is actually helping us, because we're kind of going in on your coattails for that. And it's a MOOC for art teachers who teach art, not necessarily in art classes. It could be a math teacher who wants art in the program somewhere, and that's a donor is paying for that program.
I think that's great. I think there's plenty of models in other open data worlds where users have an interest. Users of the open data sets have an interest in helping support and maintain it, and so there's no reason why you couldn't see a bunch of schools coming together, making really interesting uses, and saying, "Oh, well, we want to engage even more deeply, and we recognize that in order to do that, this open collection of information, of works, need to be robust, need to be able to exist in the long term. And therefore, part of our programming is making sure that not only our application lives, but also the data, the works, the pieces that it's built on are also robust and have long-term viability."
I think my whole introduction to this really came through with 3D Systems back, was it about 4 or 5 years ago, when they first started this program, and they were able to help support buying 3D printers to go into schools, and we were one of 3 schools that started out with some of those first Smithsonian resources out there. So I think there's, we didn't necessarily providing from our side, but the ability to be able to back up this, be able to have like the filament, do the class size stuff, there's out there. So I know there's definitely interest in it, but I think that figuring out that two-way street, or figuring out how we can bring resources from the schools in, would be a very interesting approach.
I think we'll end at this point because it is lunchtime. I don't want to keep you from food. Thank you very much. I will answer Twitter questions during lunch, so feel free to shout them out and I'll try and get answers. Thank you. That was great. Really good. Thank you. Awesome.